A man walks into a luxury car showroom and gets humiliated in front of everyone. What the smug employees don't know, he's Keanu Reeves, and he owns the place. What happens next doesn't just change the showroom, it sparks a revolution they never saw coming. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Keanu Reeves had never planned on becoming the owner of a car company. But life has a way of writing stories you never expect. Reeves Motors wasn't built for power, prestige, or profit. It was built from a promise, one he made a long time ago. Long before the fame, before the blockbuster movies, before the world knew his name, Keanu was just another struggling young man riding the Los Angeles bus system. He remembered what it felt like to be invisible. People judged him by his worn-out shoes, his soft-spoken voice, and the fact that he had nothing but a backpack and a dream. Some laughed at him, others looked right through him, but every now and then, someone would show him kindness. A bus driver waiting an extra moment, a stranger offering directions, a diner waitress refilling his coffee without being asked. He never forgot those moments, and he never forgot the people who didn't bother. Years later, after the fame and fortune found him, Keanu quietly founded Reeves Motors. It wasn't about flashy advertisements or celebrity endorsements. It was about building a company on a simple, unwavering belief. Every person deserves respect. Whether they walked in wearing a three-piece suit or old jeans, they were to be treated like family. It was personal to him. His father, a mechanic with calloused hands and a gentle heart, had always dreamed of owning a car that turned heads when it drove by. But life had other plans, and that dream was never realized. Keanu made a silent vow. No one would ever feel lesser inside a Reeves Motors showroom. And for years, he believed his staff lived by those values. He hired carefully, set policies, and hand-picked managers who promised to uphold his vision. He visited the factories, met the engineers, and walked through showrooms unannounced in the early days. Everything seemed to align with his quiet mission. But then came the letter. It was late one evening when his assistant handed him an envelope marked personal. There was no return address, just neat handwriting across the front. Inside was a letter that stopped him cold. Dear Mr. Reeves, I don't know if this will ever reach you, but I feel I need to tell you what happened to me and my daughter at your Beverly Hills showroom. We were treated like we didn't belong, ignored, humiliated, made to feel small. I thought Reeves Motors was different. I believed in what your name stood for. I'm writing this because I hope you still do. Keanu read the letter 3 times. The words blurred, but the feeling cut sharp and deep. He could see them. Maybe a young woman and her daughter, walking into that gleaming showroom filled with hope, leaving in shame. Something inside him twisted. It wasn't just about bad service. It was about broken trust. He sat alone in his Malibu home that night, staring out at the dark ocean. The memories came back like waves crashing. Being a young actor with holes in his shoes, the dismissive glances, the whispered jokes, the feeling of being less than. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. No more secondhand reports. No more polished updates from corporate. He needed to see it himself. All of it. By dawn, Keanu had made a decision. He wouldn't show up as the owner, with security detail or assistants trailing behind. He wouldn't make an announcement. No cameras. No press. He'd go in as he once was, an ordinary man, judged only by appearances. He reached into the back of his closet for his old black hoodie. It was soft with wear, the sleeves slightly frayed. He pulled on a pair of worn jeans, scuffed boots, and a simple baseball cap. There was nothing about him that screamed wealth or status. That was the point. The garage door rumbled open as Keanu rolled out his old motorcycle, a black Norton Commando, the same bike he'd ridden before Reeves Motors existed. He strapped on his helmet, the sun just beginning to rise over the... The ride from Malibu to Beverly Hills was familiar but felt different that morning. Every mile was heavy with questions. What happened to the company I'd built? Who was running it now? Had I lost them? The wind on his face did little to ease the weight in his chest. When he arrived, the Beverly Hills showroom gleamed under the mid-morning sun. It was a temple of glass and steel, pristine and polished, just as he remembered. But appearances could be deceiving. He parked his bike quietly on the far side of the lot, away from the sleek, high-end cars lined out front. He took a deep breath, adjusted his cap, and walked toward the entrance. As he approached the glass doors, he saw his reflection. Older now, lines around his eyes, gray streaks at his temples. But behind them was the same man who remembered what it felt like to be overlooked. He pulled open the door and stepped inside. What he was about to uncover would shake him to his core and ignite a change that would be felt far beyond these showroom walls. The cool rush of air conditioning greeted Keanu as he stepped into the Reeves Motors Beverly Hills showroom. The space gleamed with pristine glass walls, polished marble floors, and vehicles that shimmered like jewels under spotlights. It was designed to impress, to awe. But Keanu wasn't here to admire the architecture or the engineering. He was here to watch the people. He stood near the entrance for a moment, helmet in hand, taking it all in. No one greeted him. No one offered so much as a glance. The receptionist, seated behind a sleek white desk, scrolled on her phone, ignoring him completely. Keanu cleared his throat softly and approached. "Excuse me," he said, his tone polite but neutral. "I was hoping to take a look at the Valkyrie X." The receptionist didn't bother to look up at first. When she finally did, her eyes swept over him in a single dismissive glance. Black hoodie, old jeans, scuffed boots. She raised an eyebrow. "You need an appointment," she said flatly. "And financial proof. We don't do casual walk-ins for the Valkyrie." Keanu nodded slowly, absorbing the words. "I see," he replied, his voice calm. "Is there someone I can talk to about setting something up?" She exhaled sharply, irritated. "We're fully booked today. If you'd like to submit an application, you can do so online." Then, without waiting for a response, she turned her attention back to her phone. Keanu stood there for a few moments longer, the weight of the interaction settling heavily on his shoulders. He turned away, scanning the room. It was a slow morning, no more than 6 or 7 customers inside, but the differences in treatment were already obvious. To his right, an older man in his late 60s browsed the vehicles on display. He wore casual khakis and a windbreaker, his shoes well worn but neatly polished. The man seemed hesitant, pausing beside a silver luxury sedan. Keanu watched as a young salesperson approached him, a forced smile on her face. "If you're looking for something affordable," she said in a bright but hollow tone, "we have some excellent options in our pre-owned section. Right this way." The man opened his mouth to protest, but the salesperson was already guiding him toward the back of the showroom, away from the more exclusive models. Keanu's jaw tightened. A few minutes later, Keanu noticed a young mother with her daughter, maybe 5 or 6 years old, standing near the entrance of the Valkyrie display. The mother was dressed simply, carrying a well-used handbag while keeping a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. They stood patiently, admiring the car from a respectful distance. Keanu watched them, waiting. And waiting. Not a single salesperson approached. No one even acknowledged their presence. And then, the contrast hit hard. The glass doors swung open, and a man strolled in, wearing a tailored designer suit, his wristwatch catching the light as he checked the time. Instantly, 2 staff members perked up. One hurried to open the door for him, another brought over a tray with champagne flutes. The man barely nodded as he was ushered toward the Valkyrie X. No questions asked, no proof required. Keanu's stomach sank. This wasn't just an oversight, it was policy. He kept moving, quiet and unnoticed, drifting between displays. His mind churned with disappointment and something else, anger. But he didn't let it show, not yet. Near the back of the showroom, raised voices caught his attention. He turned a corner and saw a young Latino man, no older than 20, standing beside a matte black Roadstrike GT. The young man's hands were shoved deep into his hoodie pockets, his shoulders hunched but hopeful as he spoke to the showroom manager. Victor Langston. Keanu recognized him immediately from the employee files. Tall, sharp-suited, and carrying himself with an air of smug superiority. Langston was the kind of man who wore his authority like an expensive cologne, loud and suffocating. "I just wanted to know if I could test drive it," the young man said, his voice steady but unsure. Langston let out a short, barking laugh. "Test drive?" He eyed the young man from head to toe, making no effort to hide his disdain. "Do you even know how to drive a car like this? The Roadstrike GT is 600 horsepower. That's not something you take for a joyride." "I've got a license," the young man replied quietly. "I've been saving up. I'm serious about buying." Langston stepped closer, his smile cold. "Come back when you can afford serious." Keanu watched, his hands clenching at his sides. The young man nodded stiffly, turning away without another word. Keanu moved quickly, catching up to him just outside. "Hey," Keanu said gently. "What's your name?" The young man glanced up, surprised. "Marco," he replied. Keanu offered a faint smile. "I saw what happened. That wasn't right." Marco shrugged, trying to play it off. "It's fine. I get it all the time." "No," Keanu said quietly. "It's not fine." For a moment, Marco looked at him differently, as if seeing something in Keanu that others missed. "Thanks, man," he said, his voice softer now. "Appreciate it." Keanu nodded. "Don't give up." As Marco walked away, Keanu stood there for a while, watching him go. His throat tightened. This was not the Reeves motors he built. This was not the legacy he had promised his father or himself. He went back inside, moving through the showroom with fresh eyes. He noticed the nervous glances employees shot toward the manager's office, heard the whispered complaints about quotas and approved clientele. And he saw the fear. Fear of Langston, fear of losing commissions, fear of stepping out of line. But fear wasn't an excuse, not for this. Keanu stayed until closing time, watching, listening. He wanted to be sure, absolutely sure, that this wasn't a single bad day. And what he saw confirmed it. Time and again, customers who didn't look the part were ignored or dismissed. Employees enforced policies that quietly but brutally filtered out anyone who didn't fit a certain image. By the time the showroom lights dimmed and the last staff member locked the doors, Keanu's mind was made up. He climbed back onto his motorcycle, the night wind colder than he remembered. He'd seen enough, but knowing wasn't enough. He needed proof, irrefutable evidence of what was happening here. He couldn't afford hearsay or vague reports. If he was going to tear this rot out by the roots, he'd need to show the world exactly what had become of Reeves Motors. As he rode home, Keanu's jaw was set, his eyes cold with purpose. He knew what had to be done, and it was only the beginning. Keanu Reeves wasn't someone who acted on impulse. He believed in understanding the full truth before making a move. And this, what he saw at the Beverly Hills showroom, needed more than a reaction. It needed strategy. The night after his first visit, he barely slept. The images replayed in his mind over and over again. Marco, the young Latino man, being mocked and dismissed. The older gentleman steered toward pre-owned vehicles he hadn't asked to see. The young mother and daughter, invisible to the staff as if they didn't exist. It clawed at Keanu in a way that was both personal and profound. His company, the one that bore his name, was no longer his company. Somewhere along the way, something had gone terribly wrong. By morning, Keanu had made his decision. One visit wasn't enough. He needed to be sure this wasn't an isolated case of bad behavior. He needed to understand how deep the rot went. So, for the next several days, Keanu became a fixture at the Beverly Hills Reeves Motors showroom. He changed his appearance each time. a beanie instead of a baseball cap. Sometimes he left his beard scruffy, sometimes he shaved clean. His clothing always simple, always unassuming. No one suspected anything. As far as they were concerned, he was just another looker who probably couldn't afford what they sold. And that was exactly how he wanted it. On day 2, he lingered near the reception desk again. He watched as a young black couple entered, holding hands, their smiles wide with excitement. They were dressed in smart but modest clothing. As they approached the reception area, the same receptionist who had brushed off Keanu the day before barely glanced at them. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked sharply. The woman nodded. "Yes, we spoke to someone on the phone about seeing the Valkyrie." The receptionist's eyes narrowed. "And do you have the required financial documents?" The couple exchanged glances. "We were told we could discuss that with a salesperson," the man said. A stiff smile. "Without proof, I can't schedule you for a viewing. Feel free to look at our other models." Keanu's stomach clenched as he watched them exchange hurt looks. The man reached for his wife's hand again. "Let's go," he said softly, leading her away. A few minutes later, a young white man with designer sunglasses walked in. No appointment, no paperwork. He was immediately greeted, handed a glass of champagne, and ushered straight toward the Valkyrie display. The pattern was clear, and the more Keanu watched, the worse it got. By the third day, Keanu had begun to recognize the employees who seemed conflicted. They followed the rules, but something in their expressions told a different story. Hesitation, discomfort, shame. One in particular stood out, a young woman named Maria Torres. She was always polite, always professional. Keanu noticed she treated every customer with the same calm respect. But she also seemed nervous, as if constantly watching her back. That afternoon, Keanu waited until she was finishing up with a customer before approaching her. "Excuse me," he said softly. She turned, a practiced smile on her face that faltered just slightly when she saw him. "Hello," she said. "Can I help you?" "I was just wondering," Keanu began, his tone casual. "How do you decide who gets to test drive the Valkyrie?" Maria stiffened. "We have policies," she said carefully. "Certain requirements." Keanu gave a gentle nod. "Requirements like financial records or skin color?" Her eyes widened for a split second before she caught herself. "Sir, if you have concerns, you can speak with the manager." "I'd rather speak with you," Keanu said quietly, off the record. Maria glanced around. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Not here." They didn't speak again that day, but later, as Keanu stood near his bike outside the showroom, Maria emerged from the side exit, glancing around nervously. She spotted him and approached slowly. "You shouldn't ask questions like that," she said, her voice low. "Why?" Keanu asked, meeting her gaze. "Because it's against policy?" "Because it's dangerous," Maria replied. "Langston doesn't tolerate anyone stepping out of line." Keanu studied her. "But you know it's wrong." Maria hesitated. "We're told who to serve. We're told who to prioritize. It's not official, but we all know. If you don't follow it, you lose sales, you lose commission, and if you push back, you get reassigned. Or fired." "And Daniel Cross?" Keanu asked, his tone careful. "Does he know?" Maria gave a short, bitter laugh. "He's the one who implemented it. Langston enforces it, but Cross designed it. He only cares about numbers." Keanu's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Thank you for telling me," he said softly. Maria shook her head. "Don't thank me. If they find out I talked to you—" "They won't," Keanu promised. She looked at him then, really looked at him. "You're not who you say you are you?" Keanu gave a faint, almost sad smile. "Not exactly." Maria nodded slowly. "Then good luck." That night, Keanu sat in his study, staring at the original letter from the customer who had reached out to him. He ran his fingers over the words, feeling their weight. His sister would have hated what the company had become. Kim had always believed in fairness, in kindness, in standing up for those who couldn't stand for themselves. She had been his moral compass until the day she died. He closed his eyes, remembering her laugh, her quiet strength. Reeves Motors had been founded in her honor, and now he owed it to her to make this right. The next morning, Keanu made a call. "Michael," he said when his old friend picked up, "I need your help." Michael Tran was a tech genius, a former security consultant who now ran his own cybersecurity firm. They'd met years ago, working on a charity initiative for veterans. If there was anyone Keanu trusted with something like this, it was Michael. "Keanu," Michael greeted warmly. "What's going on?" Keanu didn't mince words. He told Michael everything. The letter, the showroom visits, Langston, Cross, Maria. Michael's tone sharpened. "You need evidence," he said. "Exactly," Keanu replied. "Undeniable. I can wire you up," Michael offered. "Audio, video, the works. We'll build a case." They met that evening at Keanu's Malibu home. Michael brought a small black case filled with discreet technology. Hidden cameras, wireless mics, a watch that doubled as a recording device. He showed Keanu how to use each one, testing them until they were perfect. "You sure about this?" Michael asked as they finished setting up. "I have to be," Keanu answered. Over the next several days, Keanu returned to the showroom wearing the hidden cameras and mics. He documented everything: the dismissive comments, the discriminatory practices, the employees following Langston's unwritten rules. One clip showed Langston bragging to another manager about filtering out the riffraff. Another captured Daniel Cross during a surprise visit praising Langston's efficiency and telling him, "Keep the showroom clean, we only want the right kind of clientele." Keanu's heart ached with every second of footage. But he kept going. This was bigger than feelings. It was about truth. Maria helped when she could, tipping Keanu off about meetings and schedules. Her quiet courage reminded Keanu of Kim, and it strengthened his resolve. By the end of the week, they had hours of damning evidence. Keanu and Michael reviewed the footage together late one night. Michael shook his head in disbelief. "This is bad," he said. "It's worse than bad," Keanu replied. "It's personal." Michael glanced at him. "What are you going to do?" Keanu stared at the screen, watching Langston sneer at yet another hopeful customer. His voice was steady when he answered. "I'm going to burn it down and rebuild it, from the inside out." Michael nodded. "Whatever you need." Keanu's expression didn't change. "I need a meeting. With Cross." Michael gave a thin smile. "Consider it scheduled." The next move wouldn't be made in secret. It wouldn't be made quietly. It was time for Keanu to take off the hoodie, step out of the shadows, and remind everyone exactly whose name was on the building. And this time, he wasn't coming alone. This time, he was bringing justice with him. Keanu Reeves had seen enough. The footage Michael Tran had helped him gather over the past week painted a clear, devastating picture, one that confirmed his worst fears. Reeves Motors, the company he had poured his heart and soul into, had been twisted beyond recognition. It was no longer a sanctuary of dignity and respect. It had become a fortress of arrogance and exclusion. But not for long. On a bright Thursday morning, Keanu woke early. There was a quiet resolve in his movements as he pulled on his signature black suit. No hoodie this time, no baseball cap to hide behind. This wasn't about sneaking around anymore. He was done being invisible in his own house. He stood in front of his mirror, adjusting his tie with practiced ease. His reflection stared back at him, calm and controlled. But behind those eyes, something burned. He grabbed his keys, slid his phone into his pocket, and walked out the door. The drive to the Reeves Motors corporate offices in Century City took just under an hour. During the ride, he said nothing. He barely moved. His focus was absolute. Michael had arranged the meeting under the pretense of a high-priority customer complaint. Daniel Cross, the regional director, had agreed, likely assuming it was another wealthy client looking to negotiate some VIP perk. As Keanu pulled into the underground parking garage of the glass and steel skyscraper, His mind replayed the hundreds of small moments that had led him here. His father's calloused hands repairing old cars with pride. His sister Kim sketching her dream vehicle in the margins of her notebooks. The first time he envisioned Reeves Motors as a place where anyone could feel respected, regardless of their background or bank account. It was time to reclaim that dream. He stepped out of his car, his polished black shoes striking the concrete with a steady rhythm, no hesitation, no fear. The receptionist at the executive floor tried to mask her surprise as Keanu approached. He was recognized instantly, of course. It wasn't every day that Keanu Reeves himself walked into an office without an entourage. "Mr. Reeves," she greeted, standing abruptly. "Mr. Cross is expecting you." Keanu gave her a polite nod, but didn't break stride as she led him to a sleek conference room. Inside, Daniel Cross stood waiting by the window, wearing a tailored suit and an impatient expression. He was mid-50s, silver hair meticulously styled, his Rolex glinting under the California sun. He turned, his smile mechanical. "Mr. Reeves," Cross said smoothly, extending his hand. "It's an honor." Keanu ignored the handshake. "Let's sit," he said simply. Cross's smile twitched, but he recovered quickly and took his seat across from Keanu at the long glass table. Keanu sat slowly, setting a plain folder down in front of him. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Its contents had already done their work. "I understand you've been reviewing a complaint," Keanu began. Cross nodded. "Yes, very concerning. I'd like to assure you that we take these matters seriously. I've already spoken with the showroom team. Sometimes misunderstandings happen with—" "This isn't a misunderstanding," Keanu cut in, his voice even but carrying weight. "And you didn't speak to anyone, Daniel." Cross blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" Keanu leaned forward slightly. "I know you didn't, because I've spent the past 2 weeks in that showroom myself." Cross paled, his mouth opening and closing for a moment. "You? What?" "No security," Keanu continued. "No fanfare, just me, watching, listening." The room seemed to shrink as Cross's carefully constructed facade crumbled. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Mr. Reeves, I can explain." Keanu raised a hand, silencing him with the smallest gesture. "Don't. Not yet." He stood, walking slowly to the window and looking out over the city skyline. When he spoke again, his tone was low but clear. "I founded Reeves Motors because I believed in something better. I believed in dignity. I believed that no one should walk into one of my showrooms and be made to feel small." He turned back, his gaze cutting straight through Cross. "You've failed that belief." Cross swallowed hard. "Keanu, I didn't know." "You knew," Keanu said sharply. "You encouraged it. Langston's practices, they're yours. Maria told me." Cross stiffened at the mention of her name. "She's lying." "She's brave," Keanu corrected. There was a tense silence before Keanu spoke again. "Bring him in." "Who?" Cross asked, though his voice had gone thin. "Langston," Keanu said. "Now." Cross hesitated only a second before picking up the phone on the table. His fingers trembled as he dialed. "Victor, could you come up to conference room 1, please?" Less than 5 minutes later, Victor Langston swaggered into the room. His charcoal suit was immaculate, his hair slicked back with precision. He walked like he owned the place. Until he saw Keanu. For a moment, Langston didn't react. Then he blinked, his arrogance faltering. "Keanu Reeves," he said, his tone uncertain. "Wow, we didn't know you'd be visiting." Keanu stayed seated, his expression unreadable. "I wasn't visiting, Victor. I was investigating." Langston glanced at Cross, who looked away. "Investigating what?" Keanu stood, slowly buttoning his jacket. "You," he said. "And your treatment of my customers." Langston's face twisted into a practiced grin. "Mr. Reeves, I assure you—" "No," Keanu interrupted quietly. "You don't get to assure me." Langston's grin vanished. I was following company protocol. Keanu's voice remained calm. You were following prejudice, discrimination, arrogance. Langston's jaw tightened. I increased sales. At what cost? Keanu's tone sharpened, but he didn't raise his voice. Who did you turn away? Who did you humiliate? Who left our showrooms thinking they weren't good enough to be treated with respect? Neither man answered. Keanu didn't expect them to. You don't represent Reeves Motors, Keanu said, his words like steel. You don't represent me. He stepped forward, closing the space between them until they stood just feet apart. You're done, Keanu finished. Langston's mouth opened, a protest on his lips, but Keanu was already turning toward the door. Security will escort you out, he said over his shoulder. As if on cue, 2 uniformed security officers appeared, their presence silent but firm. They flanked Langston, who stood frozen for a beat before gathering what little dignity he had left and walking stiffly toward the exit. Cross looked ill. Keanu, wait! We can fix this. Keanu faced him one last time. You have one chance, he said. Clean house. Implement the reforms I've already sent to your email, or you're next. Cross opened his mouth, but Keanu cut him off. No speeches, no promises. Action. The weight of Keanu's words settled over the room like a storm cloud ready to burst. Keanu walked out of the conference room without another word. As he passed the reception area, the employees watched him, wide-eyed. They had heard, they had seen, and they understood. Back at the showroom later that day, Keanu arrived unannounced. This time, he didn't wear plain clothes. He walked through the glass doors in his black suit, head held high. Employees whispered as he moved past, making his way to the central floor where Maria stood, assisting a customer. When she saw him, her eyes widened, but she didn't move. Keanu gave her a nod. Could you gather everyone, please? Within minutes, the staff stood assembled on the showroom floor. Some were nervous, others curious. A few looked hopeful. Keanu took a breath and spoke. Reeves Motors was built on respect, he said. Somewhere along the way, we lost that. He scanned their faces. Starting today, we find it again. He outlined the reforms. Anonymous reporting systems, mandatory empathy training, the elimination of any policies that prioritized customers based on appearance or wealth. There would be no exceptions. Some of you may be thinking this will hurt business, Keanu said. If kindness costs us clients, then those aren't clients we want. A ripple went through the crowd. Maria stepped forward. I want to help, she said. Lead the reforms. Keanu smiled faintly. You already have. He turned to the others. We rise together, he said quietly, or we don't rise at all. The staff stood in silence for a moment, processing his words. Then slowly, heads nodded. They understood. And just like that, the revolution began. The sun was setting over Los Angeles as Keanu Reeves stood in the executive office, staring out over the skyline. Golden streaks of fading light glinted off the windows of high-rise buildings. It was a beautiful evening, but Keanu wasn't paying attention to the view. His focus was on what needed to happen next. He had cleared the executive conference room and ordered every employee from the Beverly Hills showroom to stay late for an emergency all-staff meeting, no exceptions. Even the cleaning crew and security staff were asked to attend. This wasn't just about salespeople or managers. It was about everyone who worked under the Reeves Motors name. Maria Torres had been the first to arrive. She stood quietly near the front of the room, wearing a simple blouse and blazer. Her hands were clasped in front of her, but Keanu could see the determination behind her eyes. He gave her a nod of quiet respect. She had risked her job to help him see the truth. That kind of courage didn't go unnoticed. One by one, the rest of the staff filtered in. Some looked nervous, others curious. Whispers filled the air as employees speculated about what was going on. Some had already heard about Victor Langston's abrupt departure earlier that day. Rumors were spreading, but no one knew the full story. Until now. Keanu stepped forward, his presence commanding instant silence. He didn't need to raise his voice. He never did. the weight of his reputation, the gravity in his eyes. It was enough. "Thank you for staying," Keanu began, his voice calm but firm. "I know this is unusual, but I'm not here as a celebrity. I'm here as the owner of Reeves Motors, and there's something we need to talk about." A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd, followed by a tense quiet. Keanu let the silence settle before he spoke again. "This company was built on a promise," he continued, "that everyone who walks through our doors would be treated with dignity. Not just the wealthy, not just the famous, everyone." He paused, letting the weight of his words land. "I've spent the last 2 weeks walking through this showroom, watching, listening, and what I saw broke my heart." A few heads dropped. Others stared straight ahead, pale and motionless. Maria glanced around, but held her ground. "There have been practices in place here that don't align with what this brand stands for," Keanu said. "People were judged by how they looked, how they dressed, or how much money they seemed to have, and that ends tonight." The room was completely still. Keanu took a deep breath. "Starting immediately, Reeves Motors will implement sweeping reforms." He stepped aside and gestured to a large screen behind him. It lit up with a list of bullet points. "First," Keanu said, "we're introducing an anonymous reporting system. If you witness mistreatment or discrimination, whether it's a customer or an employee, you can report it without fear of retaliation." Several employees exchanged glances. A few nodded. "Second," Keanu continued, "mandatory empathy and inclusivity training for every staff member, from sales to security to management. No one is exempt." Someone in the back cleared their throat, as if about to protest, but Keanu pressed on. "Third," he said, his tone sharpening slightly, "we will no longer prioritize clients based on their appearance, background, or net worth. Every customer will receive the same respect and attention, whether they walk in wearing Armani or overalls." A murmur swept through the room. This time, someone spoke up. "Sir," a senior salesperson began cautiously, "if we start treating everyone the same, we risk alienating our high-end clientele. Some of them expect exclusivity." Keanu turned to face him directly. "If kindness costs us customers," he said evenly, "then they aren't customers we want." The room went quiet again. His words hung in the air like a challenge, and Keanu meant every single one of them. He continued, "Our mission is not just to sell cars. It's to create an experience of respect. If that makes us different from the rest of the industry, good. Let them catch up." There was a long pause. Then Maria took a step forward. "I want to help," she said clearly. "I want to be part of this." Keanu nodded. "You already are." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. "Effective immediately, Maria Torres is promoted to assistant manager of this showroom." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Maria's eyes widened. "Sir, You've shown integrity," Keanu said. "Courage. You put people before profits. That's the leadership we need." Maria swallowed hard and nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. Just then, the glass doors of the conference room flew open. Victor Langston stood there, flanked by 2 men in suits. His face was flushed with anger. "You think this is over?" Langston snarled. "You're making a mistake, Reeves. You fire me without cause, and I'll sue this company for everything it's worth." Keanu turned slowly to face him, his expression calm. "You're not being fired without cause, Victor. We have documented evidence of discrimination, harassment, and unethical business practices. Enough to terminate your contract and strip you of your bonuses." Langston's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but he pressed on. "You think people won't believe me? I'll ruin your reputation, yours and this company's." Keanu took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. "You'll lose," he said quietly, "and the world will know who you really are." Langston stood frozen for a beat. Then he turned to the men beside him. "Let's go," he snapped. His voice cracked as he pushed past the employees. Keanu gave a signal, and 2 security guards stepped forward, escorting Langston and his entourage out of the building. No one spoke until the glass doors closed behind them. When Keanu turned back to the staff, there was something different in their eyes. Not fear, not doubt. Hope. "We rise together," Keanu said softly, "or we don't rise at all." The words settled like a vow between them. Maria lifted her chin, standing taller. Others exchanged glances of determination. One of the younger salespeople stepped forward. "What can we do next?" he asked. Keanu smiled faintly. "Start by greeting every customer who walks in here tomorrow. Look them in the eye, shake their hand, listen to their story. Make them feel welcome." Heads nodded. "From there," Keanu added, "we'll build something better, something we can all be proud of." The staff lingered after the meeting ended. Conversations buzzed in quiet corners, ideas exchanged. It wasn't just a meeting anymore. It was the beginning of a movement. Later that night, as Keanu walked through the empty showroom, he paused at the Valkyrie X display. His reflection stared back at him from the sleek, mirrored finish of the hypercar. He saw himself as he was years ago, the young man who rode a battered motorcycle through LA streets with nothing but a dream and determination. And he saw something else. A future where Reeves Motors could be more than just a name on a building. It could be a beacon. Maria approached quietly from behind. "It's going to be hard," she said. Keanu nodded. "The things worth doing usually are." She smiled. "I'm ready." "So am I," Keanu replied. They stood there for a while, watching the city lights dance on the car's polished surface. Change had begun, and there was no turning back. The next morning, the Beverly Hills Reeves Motors showroom opened its doors at precisely 9 a.m., just like it always had. But for those who stepped inside that day, it was immediately clear. Something was different. Gone were the subtle sneers, the judgmental glances, and the whispered assessments of who was worth serving. In their place stood employees who greeted each customer warmly, without hesitation or pretense. The atmosphere, once icy and exclusive, now radiated a quiet dignity. And Keanu Reeves was there, not behind a curtain or watching from afar. He was walking the floor, quietly observing, offering a nod of encouragement or a kind word to every staff member working to make things right. Over the following weeks, Keanu made Reeves Motors his second home. He showed up early, long before the first customers arrived, and often stayed until the lights dimmed and the doors were locked for the night. He didn't come with security or an entourage. He came as himself, a leader present in every sense of the word. Every morning, he met with Maria Torres, now officially the assistant manager of the showroom. They reviewed customer feedback, shared ideas for improvement, and quietly celebrated the small victories that came with each passing day. Maria had found her stride, and the staff took notice. She handled disputes with grace, encouraged her colleagues with sincerity, and made sure every voice on the team was heard. Her promotion had come as a shock to many, but within days she had earned not only their respect, but their trust. One afternoon, a familiar face entered the showroom. Keanu noticed her immediately, the young mother he had watched being ignored weeks before. She looked hesitant as she stepped inside, her daughter clinging to her hand. Maria approached them with a warm smile. "Welcome back," she said softly. The woman blinked in surprise. "You? Remember us?" "Of course," Maria replied. "My name's Maria. What's yours?" "Jasmine," the woman answered. "And this is Amaya." Keanu stayed back, watching as Maria knelt to speak to Amaya, asking what her favorite color was. The girl giggled and said, "Purple." Maria smiled and promised they would find a car with purple stitching just for her. Jasmine's eyes glistened. We were just looking. I don't think we can." Maria shook her head. "You're here. That's all that matters." Keanu watched them tour the showroom for nearly an hour. Jasmine eventually found a modest, elegantly designed luxury sedan. Maria made sure she was treated like royalty throughout the process. When Jasmine and Amaya drove away later that day, Keanu caught the look on Jasmine's face, a mixture of disbelief and joy. It was the look of someone who finally felt seen. Another day, Keanu noticed the older gentleman he'd seen during his first undercover visit. He entered quietly, glancing around as if to see if anything had really changed. Keanu approached him himself. "Welcome," he said, extending his hand. The man blinked, staring at Keanu's face for a moment before cautiously shaking his hand. "Are you—" Keanu gave a modest smile. "Just someone who believes you should get a fair shot." The man chuckled softly. "Name's Henry." "Henry," Keanu said, "I think there's a car here you might like." They walked the floor together, stopping at a deep blue Reeves Motors Legacy sedan. Henry ran his hand along the smooth curve of the hood, his eyes gleaming. "It's beautiful," Henry murmured, "but I'm not sure I can—" Keanu cut him off gently. "Let's take it for a drive." And they did. Keanu sat in the passenger seat while Henry drove through Beverly Hills, his hand steady on the wheel, a quiet pride radiating from him. When they returned to the showroom, Henry's eyes were damp. "My wife would have loved this," he said quietly. "She still can," Keanu replied. "Take your time." As the days turned to weeks, stories like these became common at Reeves Motors. Customers who once would have been turned away now found themselves welcomed with open arms. The showroom no longer felt like a fortress, but a place where dreams were possible, no matter who you were. Maria worked tirelessly to ensure the culture shift wasn't just surface level. She held team meetings every morning, encouraging staff to share their experiences and ideas. She created a feedback board where customers could leave anonymous notes about their visits. Many were glowing, some were suggestions for improvement. All were taken seriously. The team that had once feared Victor Langston's scorn now stood behind Maria's leadership with genuine pride. They saw their jobs in a new light. They weren't just selling cars. They were making people feel worthy. Keanu's presence made an impact too. He wasn't distant or aloof. He helped carry paperwork, fetched coffee, and even vacuumed the showroom floor one evening when the cleaning staff was short-handed. His actions spoke volumes, and the team responded. One Friday afternoon, a small crowd gathered near the Valkyrie X display. A family stood there, a father, mother, and their young daughter. The father was a tall man with gentle eyes and a nervous smile. He ran his hand over the sleek vehicle, his expression awestruck. Keanu approached and recognized him immediately. Marcus Bell, a disabled veteran who had been invited to apply for Reeves Motors' new head of customer advocacy role. This wasn't his interview. This was something else. "Mr. Bell," Keanu greeted him warmly. "Looking for a new ride?" Marcus chuckled. "My daughter's birthday," he said, motioning to the little girl clinging to his leg. She wanted to see the cool cars. The girl, Mia, looked up at Keanu shyly. She was holding a tiny bracelet made of purple and white beads. Keanu knelt down. "That's beautiful," he said, pointing to the bracelet. Mia giggled. "I made it." Keanu smiled. "Would you let me wear it?" She nodded eagerly and slid it over his wrist. "For saving us," she whispered. Keanu looked up at Marcus, who smiled in quiet gratitude. Keanu's throat tightened. He rested his hand lightly on Mia's shoulder. "Thank you," he said softly. Later that afternoon, Marcus finalized the paperwork for his new car, an adaptive legacy model outfitted specifically for veterans like him. Mia sat in the back seat, humming happily. As they drove away, Maria turned to Keanu. "You okay?" she asked. He glanced down at the beaded bracelet on his wrist. "Better than okay," he said. "This is just the beginning." And it was. Word of Reeves Motors' transformation spread quickly. Customers shared their stories online. Videos of Keanu personally greeting clients and Maria leading staff meetings went viral. Other dealerships in the area took notice. Some followed suit. At first, but Keanu wasn't interested in short-term praise or headlines. He was building something lasting. Each evening before closing, Keanu made it a point to stand at the entrance and say goodbye to every customer who left. He shook hands, listened to stories, and thanked them for trusting Reeves Motors. Some days he thought of his father, other days his sister Kim, but always he remembered why he was doing this. Respect, dignity, kindness. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the Beverly Hills showroom, Keanu knew they were finally on the right road. The changes inside Reeves Motors Beverly Hills had started as small ripples, a genuine smile from a sales associate, a respectful handshake, an attentive ear. But those ripples were already spreading, faster than anyone had anticipated. Within weeks, word of Keanu Reeves' hands-on leadership and sweeping reforms was traveling far beyond the borders of Beverly Hills. Customers who had once felt dismissed were now sharing their experiences on social media platforms, accompanied by photos of their new cars and heartfelt stories of their second chances. The hashtags "Respect Drives Us" and "Keanu Cares" started popping up across posts, first locally and then nationally. What surprised everyone, though, was Keanu's silence. Reporters flooded Reeves Motors with interview requests. Media vans parked outside the dealership, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. He declined them all. Keanu refused every sit-down, every press conference. He turned away every offer for a glossy magazine cover or a primetime feature. To him, this wasn't about boosting his image or fueling the media machine. It was about doing the right thing. But people still talked. They always did. Customers took videos with him at the showroom as he shook hands or helped hold doors open for elderly clients. Someone posted a clip of Keanu pouring coffee for a couple as they waited for their test drive. That video alone garnered millions of views in days. "He treats everyone like they matter," one commenter wrote. "True leadership," said another. "This is how you run a company," another post read. "Forget the rest." And as Keanu quietly continued his work on the ground floor of his own company, something extraordinary began to happen. Other luxury brands started to take notice. At first they scoffed. In private meetings, CEOs and executives at rival car companies dismissed Keanu's reforms as a publicity stunt. They predicted sales would plummet, claiming that catering to everyone would cheapen the brand. But the numbers told a different story. Reeves Motors Beverly Hills showroom saw a 40% increase in new clients within the first month of implementing its new policies. More than half of those customers were people who had previously sworn never to return, and the showroom wasn't the only one affected. Other Reeves Motors locations across California began asking for similar reforms, and Keanu personally visited each one to oversee their transition. When quarterly reports showed a significant jump in both customer satisfaction and revenue, luxury brands could no longer ignore what was happening. Within 2 months, other high-end dealerships in Beverly Hills started rolling out similar initiatives. One brand implemented anonymous customer feedback systems. Another launched empathy training programs. Still, another took the bold step of revamping its entire sales approach to prioritize respect over wealth. But none of them had Keanu. He had become a symbol, not by design, but by deed. At Reeves Motors, familiar faces returned. Customers who had walked away in frustration now walked back in with renewed hope. Jasmine and her daughter Amaya, who had once been invisible, became regular visitors. Jasmine had purchased her first Reeves Motors car under Maria Torres's guidance, but she returned months later to thank the team for helping her rebuild her confidence. Amaya always made sure to look for Keanu, who never failed to kneel down and ask about her latest bracelet designs. Henry, the elderly gentleman who had finally test-driven his dream car, brought his grandchildren to the showroom one Saturday morning. He pointed at his new Reeves Motors Legacy sedan parked proudly out front and told them, "This is what respect looks like." Marcus Bell had settled into his role as head of customer advocacy with grace and quiet determination. A disabled veteran with a deep sense of duty, Marcus approached the job with the same precision and care he had shown in service to his country. He established outreach programs for veterans and partnered with non-profit organizations to offer driving courses for those with disabilities. Marcus ensured that Reeves Motors not only accommodated veterans and those with physical challenges, but also actively sought to empower them. Keanu watched Marcus with pride. He'd made the right choice. But he didn't stop there. At the end of the fiscal quarter, Reeves Motors Beverly Hills posted record profits. The showroom's remarkable turnaround not only defied industry expectations, but also proved that kindness and profitability weren't mutually exclusive. Keanu, true to form, announced that a significant portion of those profits would be donated. The recipients? Veterans organizations and children's hospitals. Keanu stood in front of the staff one afternoon to share the news. "We rise together," he said, repeating the words that had become something of a mantra at Reeves Motors. And, "We give together." The staff erupted in applause. A week later, Reeves Motors unveiled its newest addition to the Beverly Hills showroom. On the side of the building, facing Wilshire Boulevard, a massive mural was painted. It was a vibrant, colorful work of art showing people of all backgrounds, families, veterans, young people, seniors, standing together in front of a Reeves Motors car. Above them, in bold letters, were the words, "Respect drives us forward." Keanu attended the mural unveiling, but said little. He stood quietly at the back of the crowd, his hands in his pockets as the artist, a local muralist known for community-centered work, thanked everyone who had made the project possible. At one point, Maria found him there, away from the cameras. "You should be up front," she said softly. Keanu shook his head with a faint smile. "This isn't about me." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you for giving us the chance to make this right." He glanced at the mural. "Thank you for showing me we could." As weeks became months, Keanu found himself stepping back. Not because he wasn't invested, he was, but because his job had always been to build, not to hover. Maria had taken the showroom and made it thrive. Marcus had connected Reeves Motors to veterans communities in ways Keanu hadn't imagined. Other managers across the company's locations had followed suit. Reeves Motors had finally become the place Keanu had dreamed of in the beginning. A place his late sister, Kim, would have been proud of. A place where his father, the mechanic who never got to drive his dream car, would have been welcomed with open arms. One crisp autumn morning, Keanu stood across the street from the Beverly Hills showroom. It was just after opening. The staff was inside, beginning their day with a morning briefing. Maria was leading the meeting, and the staff laughed at something she said. A family was already outside, peeking through the windows. A salesperson stepped out and greeted them warmly, offering them coffee and a smile. Keanu smiled to himself. His motorcycle waited at the curb. He slipped on his helmet, glanced one last time at the mural, and climbed onto the bike. As he revved the engine, he caught sight of Mia, the little girl who had given him the bracelet months before. She was holding her father's hand as they walked toward the showroom. She noticed Keanu and waved. He lifted a hand in return, then throttled the bike forward and rode into the morning sun. He didn't need headlines or interviews. He didn't need his name on billboards. He only needed to know that Reeves Motors was now a place where dignity wasn't a luxury, it was standard. And that, he thought as he rode down the boulevard, was enough. 1 year later, the sun rose quietly over Los Angeles. The city moved with its usual pulse, cars inching along the Pacific Coast Highway, surfers catching the early waves off Malibu, and morning joggers tracing familiar routes. But for Keanu Reeves, this day was different. He wasn't on set, he wasn't at a charity event, and he wasn't holding meetings at Reeves Motors headquarters. Today, he was simply Keanu. No titles, no fanfare, just a man with a motorcycle and a purpose. He rolled his black Norton Commando out of the garage, wiping the seat with a cloth before strapping on his helmet. His old leather jacket creaked as he pulled it on, worn soft over the years but still reliable. He didn't bother shaving that morning or smoothing the edges. He wanted to blend in, the way he had on that first day he walked into the Beverly Hills showroom a year ago. But this time, he wasn't there to watch for failure. He was there to witness what they had built. The ride through the canyon was smooth, the early light catching the chrome of his bike as he wound his way toward the heart of Beverly Hills. The streets there had always been pristine, the storefronts glossy, the sidewalks swept spotless. But Keanu's mind wasn't on appearances. He was searching for something else, something harder to find, yet more important. Respect, compassion, dignity. By the time he pulled into the parking lot of Reeves Motors, Beverly Hills, the day was already in full swing. It was just before noon on a Saturday, the busiest time of the week. Customers milled about the lot, pointing at vehicles and chatting with sales associates. No champagne, no velvet ropes, just people. Families, veterans, young professionals, and the team of Reeves Motors staff greeting them all like old friends. Keanu parked his bike quietly at the far end of the lot, where he could watch without being noticed. He left his helmet on a little longer than necessary, taking in the scene with a kind of quiet satisfaction that filled his chest, like a deep breath held for too long. He finally dismounted and walked toward the entrance, hands in his jacket pockets. No one recognized him at first, and that was exactly the way he wanted it. The glass doors slid open with a soft whisper. Inside, the familiar shine of the showroom floor greeted him, polished but not pretentious. The place still gleamed, but the coldness that had once clung to the walls was gone. In its place was warmth, not just in the decor, but in the people. He watched a young sales associate, maybe in her early 20s, kneel beside a boy in a wheelchair, showing him the special hand controls on one of their adapted vehicles. The boy's eyes sparkled as his father thanked the associate with a look that said more than words ever could. Nearby, an older couple was sipping coffee while signing paperwork for a new car. Their hands trembled slightly with age, but the respect they were being given was unwavering. A member of the staff helped them through the process with patience, answering every question and offering reassurance. Keanu kept walking, and then he saw her. Maria Torres, standing by the main desk. She wore a smart blazer, her hair pulled back neatly. She was reviewing paperwork with another employee, but paused for the briefest of moments when she noticed him. Their eyes met. For a split second, Maria's expression softened into something that was both a smile and a knowing glance. She didn't wave him over. She didn't break her focus. She simply gave him a respectful nod of thanks, the kind of gesture that said, "We're doing it. We're holding the line." Keanu nodded back. He wandered further inside, his steps silent against the sleek tile floor. Past the Valkyrie X display, where a teenage girl and her mother were being given a private tour, and toward the Legacy sedan section, where a young family was exploring the backseat legroom. The father crouched inside the car, making silly faces to make his daughter laugh. The mother ran her hand along the dashboard, smiling with quiet pride. Keanu lingered there for a while, just observing. There was a kind of peace in knowing that no one recognized him, not because they weren't paying attention, but because it didn't matter who he was. The showroom no longer needed his celebrity or his presence to do the right thing. They were doing it because it was right. And that, Keanu thought, was the real victory. He turned quietly and made his way toward the exit. As he reached the glass doors, a soft voice behind him said, "Thank you." He paused and turned. It was Marcus Bell, now fully comfortable in his role as head of customer advocacy. He was standing near the reception area, a clipboard tucked under his arm. Keanu offered a faint smile. "For what?" Marcus returned the smile. "For giving us a chance to build this." Keanu nodded once, the understanding passing between them without the need for more words. He stepped outside into the California sunshine. His motorcycle waited at the far end of the lot. He walked toward it slowly, his pace unhurried, as if savoring the moment. As he strapped on his helmet, he glanced back one last time. The mural loomed large against the side of the building, the words, "Respect drives us forward," shining brightly under the midday sun. The mural's figures, a family, a veteran, a young woman in a business suit, were painted with such care they seemed almost alive. Beneath them was a Reeves Motors car, its doors open as if welcoming anyone who approached. Keanu mounted his bike and fired up the engine. The deep rumble vibrated beneath him, steady and familiar. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the warm breeze that carried a hint of the ocean. Without fanfare, he pulled out of the lot and onto the boulevard. As he rode away, he didn't look back again. He didn't need to. The work was done. And he knew it was in good hands. The road stretched ahead of him, the wind rushing past as he picked up speed. The sun was dipping low in the sky now, casting long golden beams across the city. It was the kind of light that made the world look softer, more forgiving. And maybe, Keanu thought, that's exactly what the world needed to be. The narrator's voice spoke softly, carrying the lesson home. Keanu didn't change the world by shouting, he did it by leading with respect. And as the sunset bathed the horizon in hues of amber and rose, Keanu Reeves rode on, quietly, steadily, toward whatever came next. Keanu Reeves proved something that's easy to say but harder to live by. That true power isn't about fame, it's not about fortune, and it certainly isn't about standing in the spotlight. It's about how you treat people when no one's watching. 1 year ago, Keanu walked into a showroom that bore his name and saw a place he didn't recognize anymore. He watched people, good people, turned away, judged, and made to feel like they didn't belong. He could have sent a memo, he could have made a speech, but that wasn't who he was. He took off his name, his fame, his armor, and he became just another man, standing quietly in a showroom, watching the truth unfold. What he saw broke his heart, but instead of walking away, he stayed. Instead of shouting, he listened. And when the time came to act, he didn't do it for glory. He didn't do it for headlines. He did it for every person who ever stepped into a place and was made to feel small. For every father who worked a lifetime for his dream car. For every mother who wanted something better for her child. For every veteran who had sacrificed everything and asked for nothing. Keanu knew. Leadership isn't standing above people. It's standing with them. He fired the ones who had failed his promise. He promoted those who lived by it. And he set in motion a revolution, not just in one showroom, but across an entire industry. And he did it quietly. There was no press conference, no red carpet moment, no flashing lights. Just change. And something incredible happened. People noticed. They noticed the kindness, the respect, the dignity. They noticed that the name Reeves Motors meant something again. Other companies followed his lead. Competitors who once mocked the reforms soon found themselves asking how they could do the same. Keanu's quiet stand rippled out into boardrooms and showrooms across the country. And while the world talked, Keanu worked. He met veterans and thanked them for their service with his actions, not his words. He welcomed families who never dreamed they'd be treated like VIPs. He created spaces where dignity was standard, not a privilege. He didn't have to do it. He did it because it was right. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all. True leadership isn't about who gets the credit. It's about who makes the difference. Keanu never asked for thanks, but he earned it. One quiet choice at a time. Now, as he rides away from the showroom on his old motorcycle, the sunset casting golden light on the mural that reads, "Respect drives us forward," we're reminded of something simple but powerful. Real heroes don't need applause. They need purpose. And Keanu Reeves has plenty of that. True leadership is treating everyone with dignity, even when you have nothing to gain. It's holding the door open when no one's watching. It's listening when others talk over. It's standing up for what's right, even when it's not easy. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He raised the standard. And in doing so, he changed everything. If you believe kindness can change the world, if you believe respect isn't earned through wealth, but through how we treat each other, then take a moment right now, like this video. Share Keanu's incredible story with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments Have you ever witnessed quiet leadership in your life? A moment where someone made a difference without asking for credit? We want to hear your incredible story, because quiet leaders change the world. One act of respect, one moment of kindness, at a time. And if you're here right now, listening to this, maybe you're one of them. Thank you for watching. And remember, respect drives us forward.